Turn your projector on. Thank you, sir. Thank you. No.
Thank you, yeah.
No, I'll hold that back.
That's a beat there. It's a good sign.
There was a bull, huh? That is always good.
It is always good. So nothing when we get one.
That's beautiful. Perfect. Thank you very much. What's on, see? I'm trying to push me over. Hey. That's very fitting to me.
a very warm welcome. You know what I mean? Anyway, it's lovely to again have a midweek class, time to connect at least midweek with our brothers and sisters, as it's so hard nowadays to actually feel things like a community, as the world has lost even that idea. So we will open our class with hymn 180. We approach thy throne in the highest of heavens, great and glorious Creator, even Yahweh, who has declared the wonder of thy name in thine only begotten Son. We gather around thy word this night. We know that that word in Christ holds all treasures of wisdom and knowledge, all that we need to know about how to live a fruitful life, a word which is like a mirror to our soul. And so tonight, as we discuss one of our brethren who have fallen by the wayside, yet he is there for us to examine ourselves, for he's no different than any of us here tonight. Help us to see that thou dost desire us to be clinging unto thee, to find our power and our motivation in thee alone, and that where thou art might also our treasure be. So we pray for thy blessing upon this night as we hear Brother Jared to bring forth that what he has called from thy word. We pray thy blessing on thy word, for it carries that blessing. May we hear it and take it in. So accept of our praise and thanks for all thy goodness in Jesus Christ thy Son. Amen. Likewise, welcome for those who have just arrived. Our brother Jared has and will continue his series on Balaam. The topic tonight is God's flexibility and patience. We'd ask that we read to introduce his remarks this night from Numbers chapter 22, verse 7 to the end. So Numbers 22, 7 to the end. And the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the rewards of divination in their hand, and they came unto Balaam and spake unto him the words of Balak. And he said unto them, Lodge here this night, and I will bring you word again, as Yahweh shall speak unto me. And the princes of Moab abode with Balaam. And God came unto Balaam and said, What men are these with thee? And Balaam said unto God, Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, has sent unto me, saying, Behold, there is a people come out of Egypt, which covers the face of the earth. Come now, curse me them. Peradventure I shall be able to overcome them and drive them out. And God said unto Balaam, You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed. And Balaam rose up in the morning and said unto the princes of Balak, Get you into your land, for Yahweh refuses to give me leave to go with you. And the princes of Moab rose up and went unto Balak, and said, Balaam refuses to come with us. And Balak sent yet again princes more and more honorable than they. And they came to Balaam and said to him, Thus says Balak the son of Zippor, Let nothing, I pray thee, hinder you from coming unto me, for I will promote you unto very great honor, and I will do whatsoever you say unto me. Come, therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people. And Balaam answered and said unto the servants of Balak, If Balak would give me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the word of Yahweh my God to do less or more. Now therefore, I pray you, tarry also here this night, that I may know what Yahweh will say unto me more. And God came unto Balaam at night and said unto him, If the man come to call you, rise up and go with them. But yet the word which I shall say unto you, that shall you do. And Balaam rose up in the morning and saddled his ass and went with the princes of Moab. And God's anger was kindled because he went, and the angel of Yahweh stood in the way for an adversary against him. Now he was riding upon his ass, and his two servants were with him. And the ass saw the angel of Yahweh standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand. And the ass turned aside out of the way, and went into the field. And Balaam smote the ass to turn her into the way. But the angel of Yahweh stood in the path of the vineyards, a wall being on this side and a wall on that side. And when the ass saw the angel of Yahweh, he thrust himself unto the wall and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall, and he smote her again. And the angel of Yahweh went further and stood in a narrow place. There was no way to turn, either to the right hand or to the left. And the ass saw the angel of Yahweh. She fell down unto Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he smote the ass with a staff. And Yahweh opened the mouth of the ass, and she said unto Balaam, What have I done unto you, that you have smitten me these 3 times? And Balaam said unto the ass, Because you have mocked me, I would there were a sword in my hand, for now would I kill you. And the ass said unto Balaam, Am not I thine ass, upon which you have ridden ever since I was yours unto this day? Was I ever wont to do so unto you? And he said, Nay. Then Yahweh opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of Yahweh standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand. And he bowed down his head, and he fell flat on his face. And the angel of Yahweh said unto him, Wherefore hast you smitten your ass these 3 times? Behold, I went out to withstand you, because your way is perverse before me. And the ass saw me, and turned from me these 3 times. Unless she had turned from me, surely now also I had slain you, and saved her alive. And Balaam said unto the angel of Yahweh, I have sinned, for I knew not that you stood in the way against me. Now therefore, if it displease you, I will get me back again. And the angel of Yahweh said unto Balaam, Go with your men, but unto the word that I shall speak unto you, that you shall speak. So Balaam went with the princes of Balak, and Balak heard that Balaam was come. He went out to meet him unto the city of Moab, which is the border of Arnon, which is in the utmost coast. And Balak said unto Balaam, Did I not earnestly send unto you to call you? Wherefore did you not come unto me? For am I not able to promote you to honor? And Balaam said unto Balak, Lo, I am come unto you. Have I now any power at all to say anything? The word that God puts in my mouth, that shall I speak. And Balaam went with Balak, and they came unto Kiriath Huzoth. And Balak offered oxen and sheep, and sent to Balaam, and the princes that were with him. And it came to pass on the morrow, that Balak took Balaam, and brought him up unto the high places of Baal, that thence he might see the utmost part of the people. So it gives me great pleasure to invite Gareth.
Well, good evening, brothers and sisters. A couple of different faces, so maybe we'll do a quick recap. But at the same time, I enjoyed the chats that we had last week. It was great. I feel like we got into the subject and the story a little bit. But tonight we do need to get moving. Balaam's story is quite long. We got through a whole 20 verses. We need to do more. For those that weren't here last week, we learnt a couple of things. And as Brother Axel said, we need to see Balaam as potentially sitting in these rows. We can't see him as being this evil man who was against God in every way of his life. He started here with us. Here's a man who said, my God is Yahweh. He was clear about that. All right? He had a strong relationship with God. He would pray to God and God would give him answers. And he had a reputation built on the fact that he understood the promises to Abraham. In fact, he's possibly connected to the family of Abraham. We can't prove that, but he comes from that region where Abraham's family came from. And the last thing we found last week is that the biggest motivator for Balaam is money. Or put it slightly differently, influence in this world. We talk money as a bit of an overall word, but it's really gain. It's things in this world. And that can be just simply influence, power, control, whatever it is that makes you tick as a personality. And we're all different. That motivated Balaam. And it can motivate us. And that's why this story is so relevant, because it comes up 9 other places through the Bible. Balaam's name is mentioned. 11 times this story is referenced, and hopefully we'll get to that tonight. We didn't last week. We'll see how we go. But last week we ended off our story at about verse 18, 19, 20. And we're at this point where Balaam was letting temptation into his life. He was leaving the door just ajar enough to be able to give him opportunity to keep doing what he wanted to do. And we have a look at what happens. In Numbers chapter 22 and verse 19, the men come back to Balaam and they say to him, what else do we have to do so that you'll do what we want? And Balaam says to them, well, listen, you're welcome to spend the night here with me. God's already told Balaam, no, you can't go. I don't want you to curse the people. And the reason I don't want you to curse the people is because I've blessed them. That's 3 good reasons. That's verse 12. If you haven't got them, note 3 good reasons in verse 12 why God says don't. Well, Balaam says, hey, why don't we hang out for another night? What for? Well, he's very clear. I'll go and find out if the Lord has something else that he might say about this. Well, God's been very clear. He said, no, don't go. He said, no, don't try to curse them. And finally, he said, the reason I don't want you to do it is because I have already blessed them. That's 3 good reasons. But Balaam's like, oh, I wonder if I could squeeze something else out. It's incredible how far he thinks he can push God to get what he wants. Well, God came to Balaam that night and he said, if the men come to call you, then sure, go your way. Rise up, go with them and do what you want to do. And that's basically what God says. And if I was to read between the story, my interpretation is it's not even 5 a.m. And Balaam's up, he's got his suitcase packed, and he's knocking on their door saying, come on, let's go. And that's the problem. Because God said, if the men call for you. But Balaam rose, as some translations would say, early in the morning. This man's keen. This man knows what he wants to do, and it's not what God's told him to do. God's been very clear in verse 12 what to do, but he's playing with temptation. He's trying to leave opportunities to find, in today's language, a verse that would justify him going and doing what he wants to do. That's what he's done. And so God says, you go. You go and do what you want. There's a little verse in the Psalms that says, God will give you the desires of your heart. It's true. If you want something, God will let you have it. He's not going to stop it. God is such a gracious, kind and loving God that will just provide so much. If you don't want him and want other things, he'll let you have it. And that's what we're going to see tonight in Balaam. We're going to see a good man go bad. And that's the whole point. Because God gets really angry with the fact that Balaam, and I'm adding this in to try and help us give the context, Balaam just went. Balaam didn't wait for the men to come to him in the morning. And that's the key issue. All right? Balaam was just interested in going. Now, I ask you, brothers and sisters, how often in your life is there something which you're challenged with, you're struggling with, and you say, I'm going to commit it to God in prayer. But in the back of your mind, you know what you want, you know the outcome you want, and you're looking for God to justify that for you. Right? Do we actually want an answer from God? Or do we just feel better that we've asked God? I mean, maybe we don't even commit it to God in prayer. But we do commit it to God in prayer, and then we deliberately go out and do everything we possibly can to make sure that we get it our way, not his way. Because we don't actually want the answer from God. What's interesting, God never answers a prayer. When we have a preconceived idea in our mind what we want, an intention to do what we want, we don't get answers. Well, rarely we get answers. This man got an answer. He's already told the answer, already in verse 12. He doesn't want to listen to it, but God's going to show his incredible long-suffering and patience to keep working in this man's life to help him to maybe, if possible, see that he's going the wrong direction. The problem is this man is so owned and so controlled by his lusts. He wants what those men in Moab are offering to him. And that's all that he can think about. That's all that's motivating, that's all that's driving him, and that's all that's going through his mind. Now, so often when we get like that, we do dumb stuff, right? We do things which other people stand off at an objective viewpoint and look at it and go, that guy is just crazy. He's obsessed. Because another person's able to objectively look at the situation and go, you're being an idiot. You are so blindly going down a pathway because you want an outcome. And sometimes we try to say something. And we'll talk about that. We'll develop that idea a little bit tonight. But we need to be honest with ourselves. We do this. We're so transfixed on what we want that we're owned by it, and sometimes we don't even realise that we're having a conversation with an ass. It sounds dumb, but that's the irony of the story. Now, for those that missed it last week, I think there's a lot of parallels in this story between that and Genesis chapter 3. Eve had a conversation with a snake, which sounds really weird, but she did. She had a deeper, meaningful conversation, just like Balaam's going to do the same thing. And God's trying to teach us something by the irony of that fact. All right? So, what we want to see tonight is how patiently God works with us, because we do the same things in our lives. Maybe not to the same extent or extreme that Balaam goes to. We've highlighted this issue that we have free will, and we're going to see that. God gives us free will, but he tries to appeal to us and encourage us to go his way in contrast to our way. And a key phrase, you're going to see it all the way through, is the way. The way. Balaam's way, God's way. There's a fight between those two ways. But what we're going to see, and this is what's probably most instructive for the young people, is to see the way God works in your life. You're going to see this big word providence. All right, probably heard that word before. What does that mean? How does that happen? How does that work? This is an explanation of how it works in your life. All right? How God tries to tell you something. Because you need to listen really carefully. Because the first time God communicates, it's subtle. It's very gentle. And then it gets firmer. And he gives you a slap. And you literally fall on the ground like Balaam does, on his face. And we have a choice to either get up and say, I'll do what I want to do, or turn around and go the opposite way. So that's what we're trying to find. All right? Because in the end, for Balaam, God hits a point where he gives up. He says, I can't do anything else with this man. He's useless to me as a worshipper, as an obedient servant. So I'm going to use him in a different way. And God's going to turn it around, and God's going to start using Balaam as a tool, as his pawn, who's just going to do God's work, and he's going to blindly find that he comes to a point where he's actually against his God, and he goes, heck, I'm in trouble. And that's our topic for next week. But that's where we're getting to. My point. What we're going to see here is what happens in our life. He works in exactly the same way with Balaam as he works with us. The choice is whether to respond or not. Now, I've been challenged on this question because the question that came to me is, but hang on, God changed his mind in this story. On face value, it sounds like God did change his mind. I mean, have a look at it. God initially said, no, don't go. And then come to verse 20, God says, well, okay, go. And it sounds like God is not being consistent. It sounds like God has changed his mind. Is this a contradiction? It's important for us to address this and get that balance right, particularly for you young people, to grasp where and how God is consistent in contrast to the way God is very flexible with you. And he will let you go your way and learn some lessons, and then he'll pull you back, and then he'll maybe give you a more direct or blunt response. We need to see that, all right? So let's think about whether God is being consistent or he's not being consistent. Sorry, that was the verse we were going to go to. Romans chapter 1, verse 24 talks about how God gives people up to something. Good context, because it's basically the same context as what we're going to see in the story of Balaam. But come back to our point. God's very clear and he is unchanging in his purpose. And I'm going to pick Genesis chapter 12 because that's really relevant for Balaam. Right? Balaam's whole reputation is built upon those that God blesses and those that God curses, are those who bless Israel and those who curse Israel. So let's think about that. God said in Genesis chapter 12, he said, I'll bless those who bless you, and in him who curses you, I will curse. And in you all families of the earth shall be blessed. That's God's promise. That doesn't change. That's God's big picture. But the way that rolls out in your life and my life might be slightly different. All right? Have a think about it. Israel is God's nation, and they will be blessed because of Abraham. Israel in this story needs to enter into the promised land. That's what's going to happen, because God said that's what's going to happen. And God's purpose is that before you enter the promised land, the kingdom for us, you need to go through a period of trial. Now, those processes, big picture of what God is doing, are unchanged. The way you individually respond to that is God's flexibility in your life and my life. Does that make sense? Yes, God's changed because God's so big, he can go that way or go that way, and it doesn't bother him because in the end, he wins. And as we talked about last week, God's in control. And that's probably the point that I want us to make here. Balaam thinks that he's in control. As we highlighted last week, Balaam thinks he'll go and ask God what to do. But in verse 9, we see that God actually initiated it, and he came to Balaam. And in verse 19, Balaam says, stay with me and I'll go and ask God. And in verse 20, no, God came to Balaam. God's in control. And we're going to pick up that idea in a minute. All right, so I'm just trying to bring back some of these ideas. The key or important thing at the end of verse 20 that is different about, I guess, the detail in the way God put it is, if the men come to you, then rise, go with them. Do what you want, Balaam. If that's what happens. Just exercise your mind for a second. What could have happened if Balaam decided to just stay home that night in his room and wait until the men came and knocked on his door? What other precedents do we have in the Bible of what God can do overnight when an enemy is at our door? Syrians. What about Sennacherib? Had an army of 1 million men around Jerusalem. Prayer? Dang, they're all dead next morning. God can do that. All right? So that little if is a big word. If these men come, because they may not, and God can control that. We don't know how they would have responded and come back to Balaam. We have no idea. The problem is Balaam got up early in the morning and he was just keen to go. And that's where the problem is. Balaam's not listening. But it's the next phrase that's also really important. Balaam, I want you to know that you're only going to be able to say what I tell you. That might not sound big to you or I. But if you're a soothsayer, your whole business is built on carefully crafted words. And Balaam's just been told that he can't use his techniques. He's going to be a tool. He doesn't understand quite how blunt a tool he's going to be in God's hands. That doesn't quite sink in till later. We're going to see that phrase come up more and more. Balaam, you'll only do and say the things that I tell you to. It's there in a couple of verses. If you've got time, by all means, note it down. All right, let's have a read then of our story. Balaam gets up in verse 22 and he's on the road. The anger of God is kindled against him because, why? He went. And the angel of the Lord stood in the way. We're going to get that phrase come up all the time. If you've got a King James, if you've got another translation, it might be in the road. This idea of in the way is going to follow right through into the New Testament. The way of Balaam. All right, so it's a direction, it's a path of life. God stood in Balaam's way to oppose him. Now, Balaam's going along on his donkey and he had 2 servants with him. Good picture, put that in the back of your mind. And the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road. If you've got a colouring in pencil, colour that in. There's the first one. The angel of the Lord was standing in the way. Verse 23. He has a sword drawn and there's a donkey who turns aside into the field. So he beats the donkey. There's the first time he beats the donkey, okay? That's important. The first time he beats it. To try and get it back onto what? Back onto Balaam's way of going. The donkey's trying to take him a different way. He's like, no, we're going this way. He's determined. What happens again in verse 24? The angel of the Lord stood in the path. Now, it's a slightly different word. It's a narrower road among the vineyards, where there's a wall on either side. And where the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she pressed herself against the wall and she crushed Balaam's foot against the wall. So he beat her again. There's the second time he beats her. Verse 26, colour this one in as well. The angel of the Lord went further and stood in a even narrower, straight, narrow road, is what the word means, where there was no way to turn either to the right or to the left. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she crouched down. 3 steps. All right? Before we dig into that, I just want to tell you what we're going to see. We're going to see providence working in these stories. What's providence? Well, if you learn nothing else, take this phrase away. Providence warns like a friend before it punishes you like an enemy. All right, get that? Providence warns you gently. It's like a friendly ass. Just go, no, let's go this way. And it smashes your foot against the wall. And then it says, you're on your own. All right, there's a process. Now, I want to highlight that. This is not my interpretation of it. This is Peter's interpretation, all right? Sometimes we can think that Balaam was bad because of what he did in chapter 25. Yeah, that's the end result. No. The New Testament says Balaam's bad because of what he does in this chapter. 2 Peter says Balaam is rebuked for his iniquity. What's his iniquity? Not the fact that he taught Israel to be morally corrupt. No, that's not it. It's when the dumb ass spoke to him in a man's voice and forbade him being a mad prophet. He was a prophet, he was being mad, and he was rebuked, or he was forbade for doing it. And that's where the iniquity of Balaam was. So don't put Balaam in a box over there, out there with the really bad people. That's where he ended up, absolutely. But his iniquity was while he still called Yahweh his God. And he was still happy to say, I've sinned, because we're going to see that in just a sec. All right, so the real issue is here in this part of the story. All right, what are we trying to say? We can be blindly going along in our mission, even in the ecclesial environment, and not realise that we're going to oppose God. Until smack, it hits us between the eyes, and we have to face the reality. All right, that's what we're going to see. God's trying to get Balaam's attention, trying to call out to him to say, listen. He doesn't. Now you might say, I know these stories. Well, if you've got any thoughts on why the angel is carrying a sword, I'd love you to think about it. Chat about that afterwards. Did he need a sword? Did that angel need a sword for self-protection or defence? No. He could have dropped Balaam on the first time. Why is he carrying a sword? What's he trying to tell us? Is it the way Balaam's going to die? Is it about the sword of the Spirit that's going to divide him? Have a think about that. Let's dig into that one if you want to, if you're familiar with the story. Those that aren't familiar with the story, can just go home. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it was power. It's not that switch. Do you want me to toggle that? All right, I want you to picture the road that Balaam's on the first time. What do you think the road looks like in verse 23 while we're figuring this out? Try and create a mental picture. Thank you. Thank you. What do you think the road is like in verse 23? In contrast to what the road is like in verse 24. Just try to mentally picture it. This is what Bible study is. It's about visualising what Balaam was going through. What was he experiencing? What was it like when an ass is able to just wander off onto the side? What's it like when he's walking through a vineyard where there's a wall on either side? What's it like when he goes a bit further to a point where it's really narrow and he can't turn either left or right? It's just this really narrow pathway. Yeah? Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, maybe that will help. All right, so let's just picture the scene. He's trotting along down this road, and this angel's up here, and Balaam's ass just takes him off here into the paddock. Balaam beats up on the ass, and it gets back on the path. So further down around the corner, they come to this path. And we're told the angel of the Lord stood in that narrow path, it's a different word, between the vineyards. I haven't got vineyards on both sides, sorry, I couldn't get that. But there's a wall on either side. Now just imagine what happened to his ankle, or his leg as he gets it smashed against the wall. It hurt. Right? What do you think it was like when he went further to this point here? Well, think about his servants. What are his two servants thinking as they're watching this guy hoeing into his donkey? And they know that it's been a faithful donkey all his life. They'd think he's a fool, don't they? And that happens in ecclesial life. Because we see a person who's determined to go their way, and we look at them and go, you're just being so stupid. You're just not seeing the reality. You're being a fool. And that's what we need to see. That's the story that we're seeing. All right? So it gets to a point where it's gone from wide open to narrower to narrower. Balaam needs to face some realities. He's getting taken to a point where God is narrowing the options down, so he has to face up to the reality, not nick off to that side or duck and weave and get away from something. Things are getting tighter. Life's just getting a bit more constrained, a bit more intense. I want to highlight that God's in control. Did you read carefully what it says here in verse 26? The angel of the Lord went further ahead. What does that tell us? The angel knew exactly what Balaam was going to do, where he was going, and when was going to be the next opportunity to put pressure to the right amount in Balaam's life. Just to notch it up a bit. He went further ahead to this narrow place where there wasn't an opportunity for him to turn to the left and right. What does that mean for you and I? Well, I ask you, how often in our lives does God go a bit further with us in his patience to try to help us to realise what we're doing? How often do we come to God asking him to justify something, to accept something, to allow us to do something, and God in his mercy allows us to do it? All these consequences. You get your foot smashed against the wall. Yeah, sure. God's still right in the fact that he allows us to have our free will. But there's consequences as he tries to bring us to the right path. And we either do a Balaam or we do a Saul. Where did Saul go? He went to a house on the street called Straight. After his servants had watched all and observed all of what had gone on. See the parallels? You think about that? We said there was stuff there. I'm not going to get distracted. All right, what about this donkey? What's this donkey doing? Well, the donkey in the end just crouches down and just drops Balaam on that sore foot. Because he acknowledges, he says, I'm powerless. I can't do anything else. I have tried to help you, but at some point, you've got to bear your own burdens, don't you? People can carry your burdens for a little while, but at some point, Paul says, you need to carry your own burden. And that's what the donkey does. But in verse 28, I missed it here. She lays down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger is kindled at her for that again, the third time. So he beats her up again. And then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey. God opened the mouth of an ass. Just think about it, that's a miracle. But it was a miracle that was easier to open an ass's mouth and have an ass start talking than to get his prophet to see reality. That's what we're being told. Because in a minute, God's going to open Balaam's eyes. But it was better to go through this process. Try to appreciate the lengths that God is going to in this man's life. Even though he's determined, he wants to do what he does, God's trying to appeal to us. Right? So much so he goes, "Hey, Balaam, what have I done to you to make you strike me 3 times?" And something should have made the guy go, "What? My donkey's talking to me today. This is next level." But he doesn't, does he? He just talks back. And he just keeps the conversation going. Why? Because he is so blind, so focused on what he wants, can't see a single other thing. You know what's most ironic about it? He turns around to that donkey and he says, "You made a fool of me." Hang on. Who's the fool? A human talking to an ass or a donkey? Who's the idiot here? That's the irony. It goes further. Balaam then says, "If I had a sword in my hand, I'd kill you." And there's a whopping great big sword over his head. But he can't see it. I'm sure you can think about your own life or someone else's life where you've tried, you've begged, you've tried to carry them, but they won't listen. That's what we're seeing. That's what this story is about. He says, "I wish I had a sword so I could kill you." And the ass is thinking, "What, man? He got one, not you." This ass is smarter, sharper and faster. But what is an ass known for? An ass is known for one thing: being so blindly, ignorantly wanting to go its own stubborn way that it's not very broad-minded. Well, this prophet is even less broad-minded. Can we see what the story is trying to tell us? Are we getting the picture of what the angels are doing here? Just grasp that, because that's your role in the kingdom. It's funny, but it's your privilege to work with people in the kingdom. You'll maybe get some people like Balaam, but you'll also have some wonderful opportunities where people will stop, like Saul, and turn around and say, "I'm being a fool. I'm going to stop kicking against the pricks, and I'm going to do what you want." That's our joy for the future. That's a little insight. That's a picture of what it's like. Let's go to the next verse, verse 30. The donkey says to Balaam, "I'm your donkey, on which you've ridden all your life long, to this very day. I'm carrying you now. Is it my habit to treat you like this?" And Balaam goes, "No." Just picture that. Just try to grasp that, what we're being told by that. Why is God giving us this story? Is he just trying to be funny? Is he trying to give us a bit of a humorous insight into the angel's mind? No, it's so much more than that. I keep saying this is a glimpse of the way God works in your life and my life. It is. Why are we given this story then? Peter's very clear. He said the ass rebuked Balaam at this point. He was being foolish at this point. Well, those that weren't here last week, Balak is like the world, trying to convince Balaam to come his way. So if that's the type, that there's people out in the world that are trying to convince you to come and do something you know is not right and not good for you, who's the donkey? Well, in the ultimate, it's Christ, who sacrifices everything. Well, a donkey is known as being stubborn, but it's also known as being loyal, right? A donkey knows its master's crib. That's God's own perspective on it, right? A donkey's known for being faithful and loyal, carrying all the burden and just being a reliable, though stubborn, beast. Can we think about it? This donkey, in daily life, apply it to ourselves. This donkey is like a faithful, lifelong friend. Like somebody who's always done good for you, who's always cared for you, always been there to provide for you, got a wonderful track record of being loyal and doing what's best and dedicated to the truth. Let me put it this way. It's like an older brother, older sister, who's worked in your life. They've taught you Sunday school. They've maybe taught you the first principles. They've created this ecclesial environment that's safe for you to come and learn the truth and not be distracted by other things. Right? They're probably willing to put their neck out for you and put up with all your stupidity at times. But there comes a point in everybody's life where we just want to do what we're going to want to do. And we're determined to do that. And it's sometimes that person that comes to us and says, don't do it. And how do we respond? We beat them. Maybe only verbally. Maybe behind their back. We beat them with words and we criticise their motive and we pull them down. But they've been such a loyal example all their life in giving and providing and carrying you if they could have. And they're just trying to gently rebuke you for your madness. And we get off and beat them. Why do we do that? Why don't we value those brothers and sisters in our ecclesia who are willing to give so much? Why don't we listen to what they're trying to tell us? That's actually how we hear God. That's how we hear God. We don't lie on our bed and get this miraculous insight that comes to us, our head open and knowledge poured in. That's not how we hear God. We hear God by our genuine, loyal, loved brothers and sisters giving us a hint, giving us a tip, giving us an insight into a verse. God's working through stubborn but loyal friends. Just think about that. You can be a foolish Balaam, or you can listen. Flip that story around the other way. You can be a loyal, faithful servant. I didn't want to say that.
I'm just thinking about the two donkeys which the Lord took on his ride.
Sure. You can be a dependable friend. In need, in times of need. How do you do that? Is it my habit to treat you like this? I've been loyal all your life to you. That's how we do it. We need to show a loyalty, get close to a person, enough to be able to speak to them in those times. But at the same time, be ready, because we might cop it. We might get a beating. But that's our job, because that's what the Lord does. And ultimately, that donkey is a symbol of our Lord who gave all while we were sinners. Let's keep going. What does the donkey have to say? Well, maybe we should look at verse 31. Verse 31, God does another miracle. The Lord opened the eyes of Balaam. And he saw an angel standing in front of him with a sword drawn in his hand. And so what else would you do but bow down to a man with a sword? Even Joshua, who is a warrior, does that. Right? But don't give Balaam too much credit for this. Yes, he bows his head. Yes, he throws himself down the ground. And yes, he puts his face on the ground. But the fact is, his back's against the wall. He can't go to the left or the right. And his donkey's just given up on him. He's going to lose. So, hey, take the best of the options. Because have a look carefully at what he does. No, we're going to get to that in a sec. Sorry, verse 32. Have a look at his response in a minute. We're going to get to that. Verse 32, the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? Look, I came out here to oppose you. I came out here because your way, what you're doing, is perverse before me." And there's 2 things I want to address there. Oppose is the first time that Satan is used. It's actually earlier, actually, in the same chapter. But this is one of the first times that we see God working against a person, but for their good. It's the word saying, I've come out to oppose you. Why? Because your way is perverse. That's a really interesting word. That word perverse, I know Hebrew words. But the reality is the word has two ideas. Rashly turning over something. Two aspects. That word perverse. Rashly turning over something. Balaam rashly, in his emotion and in his lust for what he wants, turned God's command over and said, nah, I'm going this way. He turned what God had said, no, I don't want you to do, but if they come, then he can go. He turned it all over and used it as an excuse to justify what he wanted to do in his life. And I'm sure you've probably done that. I certainly have too. We find that grey line that justifies what we want, and we flick it to say, well, see, God doesn't say I can't, so that means I can. That's not what he said. And that's the way so often we do in our life. We'll have a look at how God looks at it. In verse 33, God's very clear about the way he thinks about it. In verse 33, he says, the donkey saw me and turned away from me 3 times, Balaam, and if she hadn't done that, I would have killed you. She's the one that's kept you alive. Face that. Balaam would have been dead if it wasn't for that donkey. All right? Verse 34, Balaam goes, whoa, okay, all right. I've crossed a line. But I want you to look at his words carefully. Balaam says to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned. Great, that's superb. You should just stop right there. For I did not know that you stood in the road against me. What's he saying there? I've sinned because I didn't know that you were standing in the road against me. That's not the problem. The problem isn't that an angel's standing there with a sword. That's not the problem. The problem is that Balaam's going to do what Balaam wants to do, and he's made a decision to do what he wants. He's been perverse, but he thinks he's sinned because the angel was just standing there in front of him. No, Balaam, that's not the problem. Let's own the problem. Let's be real. Well, he's not. Look what he says next. Now, therefore, if. Oh, we got another if in Balaam's life. If it's evil in your sight, I'll turn back. If. Was I not clear enough in verse 12? Was I not clear enough in verse 22, 20, when I said, if the men come? God says, was I not clear? Balaam's saying, oh, well, you know, if it's evil to you, I'll turn back. But I really want to go. But if you don't want me to go, I won't. Where's this man's heart? He's clearly owned, isn't he? He has no intention of doing what God wants him to do unless God literally uses his sword to force him down a path. And there's a point where God says, enough's enough. I'm done. Because God gives you and I freedom. He gives us free will. He says, you can choose your path. There's a limit, there's a line to when God says, I can't work with you anymore. You've crossed that line, Balaam. And Balaam crosses that line at this point. At this point, Balaam has gone too far. His words are cheap. He has no intention of acting as a repentant person should. He says, if you want me to turn around and go back, I will, but I don't want to. But if you want me to, and you'll do it by forcing me with your sword, then okay, I'll go, because I'm dead if I don't. It's just the best of the two options, right? It's a half-hearted apology. It's just empty words, really. The if comes back to here. If. I forgot to use that slide. I think we come to a point where God basically gives up. Because in verse 35, God says, listen, you go your way. You go with the men, but remember, you're only going to be able to say the things that I tell you. You're a controlled, owned man. The other word for that is you're a tool. in my hands. Now that resonates in Balaam's mind, and I think Balaam's scared. I think Balaam knows that he's going to get himself into an awkward position. I think that's in his mind. We're going to see that in a couple of verses' time. But do you know what the really sad part is? The most devastating part of that verse is that Balaam thinks that he's got his way. And he thinks that he's got God to agree with him. And he thinks he's allowed to do it. What he doesn't know is that God's rejected him. God said, go your own way. And he is now a vessel fit for destruction. He's going to find himself on the wrong side, but he's still here in the ecclesial hall. Because he still is willing to say, I've sinned. You're my God, and if you tell me, I'll do what I have to do. But his heart is way out there. See how we're at such a critical point? Balaam thinks he's got his way, and he thinks he's got his God to agree with him. He's deluded. Absolutely deluded about what his future is going to come for him. It's going to dawn on him in our next study, chapter 23, early verses. It's going to dawn on him when he sees the reality. But that's our next subject. Bad decisions have serious consequences. But God's going to just take him and use him for his purpose. God's still in control. Totally in control of this situation. So, what happens? Let's just finish off by looking at a picture of this story of the way Balaam meets Balak. We talked about Balak being the world with open arms, there to welcome Balaam to him, to say, good to see you, because you're here to do what I tell you to do. That's what we're dealing with. Have a look at what we get in verse 36. When Balak heard that Balaam was coming, he was on his path, he was on the way, he went out to meet him at a city in Moab, which was on the border of Arnon, at the boundary of his territory. That's telling us that Balak left his comfy palace and he went right out to the boundary of the state, of the nation, to welcome Balaam. He's keen. He's going to put on a bit of a show. These are dignitaries. They're welcoming someone important who's given, as we talked about in the first class, an open checkbook to get Balaam to come along. Balak's going to do his part. And just listen, because this is so insightful, the way the world treats us. It could be about your job. It could be about friends who welcome you to a club, whatever it may be. Just listen to the way Balak talks. All right? In verse 37, Balak said to Balaam 3 things. Did I not send again and again to summons you? Why did you come to me? Am I not able to honour you? What's Balak doing? He's just playing to Balaam with open-ended questions to make Balaam feel like he was important, valued, wanted, and was going to make a difference. And the world will do that too. It'll be the opening line of your new job opportunity, the welcome to a new club, to whatever it may be. The world will say, you're welcome, until chapter 23, when you don't do what they want. And we're going to talk about that next week. And that's the shift. In verse 37, it's all these big, open, lovely statements about how important it was that you come. I wanted you to come. I called you. Why didn't you come? Couldn't I be enough for you? Am I not able to honour you? Listen to Balaam though. How does Balaam respond? This is me reading into this story. It's me trying to feel it. So I could be wrong. But I've got reasons why I think I do. Or see it this way. Balaam responds to Balak and he says, I've come to you. But he's feeling a little bit shy. He's feeling a little bit awkward. Because this next phrase is very carefully worded. I'll come, like you asked, but I don't have any power to say anything. Hang on, man. You're a soothsayer with a massive reputation, an international reputation that's known around the then known world. He says, oh no, hang on, I've got no power to say anything Is that what I'm told? The word that my God puts in my mouth, that I'll speak. See how he's shifting the responsibility? He's going, oh, but it's God. Oh, I'm not in control here, it's God. He's creating an opening. We're going to pick up on that in our next class. We're trying to set a picture. What's the next verse? The next verse is that Balaam went with Balak and they came to Kiriath Huzoth. So what? Well, we're told that it's Kiriath Huzoth. That name means a place of streets and villages. What do we know? It's a border town. It's a place where streets and villages are all together. Who comes to a border town? Travellers. All different walks of life come and meet at a place like this. And Balak's come out to meet Balaam, to welcome him. And what would a king do when he's come to welcome a dignitary, an important person? You put on an event, right? A big religious event, because this is a religious thing, and that's exactly what he does. So Balak sacrificed bulls and sheep, and he sent some to Balaam and to the princes who were with him. Let's be honest, because that's King James language. No, that's NET language. What did Balak send? A piece of steak? He sent meat offered to idols. What's meat offered to idols? Is it anything? No. What's the problem with meat offered to idols? Everything else that goes with it. Right? What are the Moabites known for? Morality? No. This is a religious ceremony that's on the edge of the nation, where all walks of people's lives meet in a village where all these roads come and go, and there's a great big Moabitish religious party. And Balak sent some of that to Balaam to enjoy. Or shall I put it differently? To open Balaam's mind to all the good things that Balak has to offer him. And what I'm suggesting is this became the groundwork. This became the foundation where Balaam learnt the techniques of Moabite immorality, and it became the basis and the foundation for Balaam being able to teach Israel how to sin in chapter 25. Because that's the end of this story. I just want to jump over to what we missed last week, because it's fairly important for those that don't know the story of Balaam. Chapter 22 of Balaam is this prophet being called and enticed to come and curse Israel against God's will. We've done that. We've talked about that. Balaam's prophecies that he's going to make are true. They're very true in every sense. The things that Balaam says are right. They're not evil. They're good towards Israel. He does 4 of them. In chapter 24, the prophecies continue, but Balaam fails to curse Israel, so he fails to earn his reward. That's what happens in chapter 24. All right? Now, we could come to the end of chapter 24, and we draw the conclusion, if we read the closing verse of chapter 24, that Balaam packs up and goes home because he's failed. In verse 25 of chapter 24, it says, Balaam got up and departed and returned to his home. And the next phrase says, and Balak also went his way. The question is, which way did Balak go? It sounds like they went opposite ways. Well, the truth is they didn't go opposite ways. Balak went with Balaam to keep encouraging him to teach Israel, or find a way to curse Israel. So chapter 25, Balak introduces immorality to the nation of Israel. And the result is, well, he stops talking and trying to curse Israel, and he figures out that if I corrupt Israel morally, I'll bring a curse from God on them. And the result is 24,000 people die. Now, the point we want to talk about next week is what in the world leads a brother to do that. But he does. And on the edge of entering the kingdom, or the promised land, 24,000 people gave up their hope. Chapter 31 tells us that Balaam is paid his reward and he's living life with the Midianite rulers. It's a short period. We're going to talk about that. But this problem of giving up on our faith and giving up on our hope so close to the promised land is the message of Balaam's life. This is the point of his life. And Moses is going to pick it up later in Deuteronomy 23 as a warning. Joshua is going to pick it up later in Joshua 13 and 24. Micah is going to pick it up in chapter 6. Nehemiah is going to talk about the same problem in his ecclesia in chapter 13. Come to the time of Jesus Christ, and Paul's going to talk about it in Corinthians. Peter's going to warn us about it. Jude's going to warn about it. And Jesus is going to tell us the same thing in his final words to you and I. And the point is, on the edge of us entering the kingdom, we can do the same thing. Israel was so close. They're right there. They were about to enter the promised land that had so much success. Things had gone so well for the nation in conquering other people through here. But on the edge of entering the promised land, they're tempted. What's the point? The point is, we need to know what we want most in life and be clear in that. Have a really clear vision of what is most important to us. Don't give up what you want most. Don't give up that kingdom for what you think you might want and might enjoy today. And that's the takeaway of Balaam's life. That's where we need to go. I want us to know the end of that story for those that don't know the Balaam story, or the story of Balaam. Jude picks up this whole point and he says, woe to these people who give up their hope because they want something else that they know is not as valuable, but because it's right there in front of them, it seems so important and it's so big because they've lost perspective of what is the real big issue in life, because it's just too far outside of reality for them. We need to keep that vision looming huge, close, so it stays in perspective, so it stays big, or else this other stuff gets big. Because people have, and they do, give themselves up to the error of Balaam. And the error of Balaam is a reward now. And it's not always that good. And we're going to see that next week. I don't have a short concise answer.
Like on your behalf, thank Jared for a very, an evening where we all were looking into ourselves and where are we. And I was thinking about those two servants. They really, I think, represent Jew and Gentile looking on, as we do, looking on to this man. And of course, we also know that unless we are born again from water and of the Spirit, we cannot see the kingdom of God. And so our vision has a lot to do with our devotion. And if that devotion is not there, the world is ready to take us down. Okay, we will look at an announcement for next week, the 28th of June. There will be a continuation of the combined Bible class at Heritage College at 8 p.m. That time we have Brother Paul Wern speaking on the first century ecclesia. So we close then with hymn and prayer. Our closing hymn is 172. Yahweh, our God, may we know thy way, for we know our own. We see in this man which we have looked upon, which thou hast, as it were, put before us, opened up, that we might examine in him our own selves. We do indeed give thee thanks for such examples, wherein we see providence, your willingness to save, thy will not to go against our will if we persist, that in all this we might encounter those difficulties which our own will has brought upon us, and it might turn to thee. We live in an age, Father, where there is a lot of talk about those things which look good, but they are all part of a scheme to draw us away from thee. And Father, we know that as the people of Israel were drawn to fornication, we also know that if we lay in bed with this world, we could face the same consequence. But thou art patient and kind and forbearing. But we also saw in this story, there comes an end to that if we persist. We realize in all this that the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. Help us, Father, to draw near to thee. Help us to grow towards thee such that we can see ourselves in the vision with thy Son, together with his bride, in an age to come wherein thy will shall be seen in all the glory of men and women, children, old and young, who will be open, honest, true, in a world wherein war shall be no more. We thank thee also for the time we have hereafter to enjoy food of thy providing, and to enjoy each other's in company and fellowship also of thy providing. And accept our thanks and praise for all this in thy Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.